Welcome to Lecture 2, GDS081. By now you should have purchased the textbooks or gotten the free ebooks through O'Reilly or Peach Pit or another source. And if you've done the other important prep piece, you will have access to Adobe After Effects or the Adobe suite, Adobe CC suite of software. In this lecture, we're going to take a look at and review some of the concepts of motion graphics that we talked about in the last lecture, briefly in the orientation, and some simple animation principles that we will, of course, discuss in more detail through the semester. So this is a pretty short lecture to sort of get you primed for some of the topics that we'll explore deeper through the semester and to get you started for this week's lab. Last week we talked about motion graphics and the concept of motion graphics. And from my perspective, motion graphics is an amalgam of or an integration of animation, design principles, film, and art. And motion graphics basically gives life to things that are static. It gives life to art and type, logos, data, user interfaces, and presentations. And these are some of the things that we'll explore this semester. And of course, one or two of the things that you will integrate into your final project. You know, movement draws attention. So when you see that ball drop down, your eye immediately focuses on it. In fact, we're wired probably from way back in the early primordial days of human beings that anytime we see movement, it tends to draw our attention. You know, a good example might be when you're sitting and you're studying or you're reading a book and someone walks by and you see them in your peripheral vision, you're almost compelled to move your eye to look at them. Animation is a technique of using successive drawings or frames to create the illusion of movement. So After Effects helps us to create an illusion of movement, like the illusion of this oval moving across the screen. You know, it was difficult for your eye to not want to track the movement of the oval. But animation software, and even something as simple as PowerPoint, which I'm using for this presentation, creates the illusion of movement through successive drawings. You know, if you take your eye and you focus on the center of the video and don't look directly at the oval, you can perceive or see each of the successive drawings or frames that PowerPoint is creating to create the illusion of movement. Let's take a look at and discuss the idea of what's going on in terms of creating this illusion. Software applications like Adobe After Effects, Adobe Animate, which was the old Flash software that I teach in GDS47, creates the illusion of movement using keyframes and tweening. And animations are composed primarily of frames, sort of like frames from your old flip book, right? But keyframes are important to defining an object's movement in animation or change in movement, such as position, rotation, scale, etc. In fact, start to think of the term keyframe as meaning change or snapshot of an object over time where there's some change in position or property of that object over time. For example, in that simple animation that we see of the oval from one part of the screen to the next, the, the first key frame is the starting point, and the last key frame is the ending point. And in between, PowerPoint then fills in the gaps for us. That filling in those gaps is called the in between or tweening. And that's done automatically by the software. We don't have to do that. We don't have to draw each frame of the flip book. That interpolation is done for us using a process. The computer uses a process in calculating the in between and the key frames. And that often involves things like easing in or easing out for us, or speeding up or slowing down the animation. As we see here, if I slow down the bouncing ball that you saw when we talked about movement and our eyes being drawn to the movement, if I slow it down, you can really see all of what the keyframes and the changes that are occurring. So the easing in or speeding up of the ball as it falls down is a change in position, or X and Y coordinates. And each time that the ball hits the imaginary plane, we can see that it compresses, and those are changes in properties. But in between, the computer is doing the interpolation to depict it for the person viewing the animation. Disney developed 12 principles of animation that sort of distill almost everything that we will explore in motion graphics: squash and stretch, anticipation, staging, straight ahead, pose to pose, follow through and overlapping action, slow in or slow out, which is similar to easing, arcs, which are really important to variety and drawing the attention of the person viewing the animation, secondary action, timing, exaggeration, solid drawing, and appeal. We'll explore each of these 12 principles through the semester. What I'd like you to do is to take a look at Disney's 12 principles of animation in this great video called The Illusion of Life. What I'd like you to do next is to participate in a discussion and an activity. First, search the web for one example of a motion graphics composition that you find demonstrates 1 to 2 principles of animation that you saw in the video. And then post a link to the composition and a comment on why you selected it and how it demonstrates at least 2 of the 12 principles of animation presented in the video. So you'll have to log into Canvas, go to the discussion forum on the 12 principles of animation, and post a link to the composition that you find and a comment on why you selected it and how it demonstrates at least 2 of the 12 principles of animation. And if you're really interested in learning more about how the 12 principles evolved, a good book to check out from the library or to read if you're interested in purchasing it is The Illusion of Life by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson, who both were animators at Disney.